This screencast is about how to find a conclusion in the text. Usually it's the very first question in Unit 1 and Unit 2, so I'm going to quickly go through some suggestions of how you might find the conclusion. Firstly, you should use all the clues that are given in the text, and there's lots of different ways of doing that. First of all, you need to make sure which document you're looking in and which paragraph the conclusion is in. They often say this in the question. Secondly, if you look at the title of the document, it often gives you a clue as to which side that the author is arguing. In this case, the article is called Degrees of Value ? Which might make us think about whether they're questioning whether degrees have any sort of value. So that gives us a clue which bias the article might have. Next, if you've got time, and it might help, especially if you're looking for intermediate conclusions as well, if you look at what each paragraph is about and look what bias it has towards the subject. In this case, I've looked at each paragraph by itself and decided, well, what actually is it saying? So in this second paragraph, it's talking about the high cost of degrees. The third paragraph about the potential of not getting a job with a degree. That degrees don't reflect the economy. Too many people are going to university and getting degrees. In this one, it's saying, although vocational degrees is leading to more employment, some of the subjects are not rigorous enough at universities. And finally, there's not enough research in some universities, which means there's no academic rigour. I can see that this is all negative towards degrees. Next, you should look for possible indicator words. Now, we know that there are indicator words for conclusions. We know that there are some that are possible. Things like should and shouldn't are possible indicator words. So look for them. The chances are they're not going to give you a simple one like therefore, but you might look for something like so to see if that gives an indication of where the conclusion is. Now, usually the conclusion can be found in the first or the last paragraph. That doesn't have to be the first or the last sentence, but usually they're there. They're either stating what their argument's going to be in the first paragraph or summarising it all up at the end. So look out in those paragraphs specifically. So if you found something you think is the conclusion, you should ask yourself this question: does it summarise everything? So I looked at the bias of each of the paragraphs, and does that conclusion, does that sentence actually summarise all of those things together? Could you argue the opposite? A conclusion is an opinion, so you should be able to argue the opposite. If not, you might have chosen something that's not actually the conclusion. And finally, when you come to write it, it's usually worth 3 marks. You need to be very careful that you don't include other elements. So if you're writing other indicator words like such as or like, or you're starting to write names and places and numbers which could be parts of examples and evidence, just be careful. You must only write the exact part of the conclusion and nothing else, otherwise you'll drop down to 2 or 1 marks. It must be word for word. So finally, let's try to find the conclusions. So I'm going to start with the first paragraph here. Now we've decided that everything here is that degrees are negative. They're not worth very much. So the first sentence, a degree used to be the pinnacle of education, is actually saying how good degrees are. So that should ring alarm bells, because that can't be the conclusion, because that's the opposite of what we found all the other paragraphs saying. Now there's a however there, which means that we've got a counter coming up, the opposite to that. So let's see what the counter says. There are now many reasons why degree level qualifications are of very little value and not worth having. Now that is summarising everything here. They've not got much value and they're not worth having. Now actually this piece of information at the front is not needed. The actual conclusion is degree level qualifications are of very little value and not worth having. In this case, no indicator words to particularly show where it is, but we know that it summarises, and we could argue that actually they are of value and are worth having. So it's something that can be argued, and it's our main conclusion.